Hey guys, Firecat back here again. So with the new release of the Steam Workshop, I've had a lot of inquiries about how to create missions on the game Discord. For VTOL VR. So I thought I would take folks through a quick tutorial on using the mission editor and setting up a mission. This is quick and dirty, it's not going to cover every scenario, but hopefully it will get some folks started with mission creation. And just note, my voice is a little froggy. It's early in the morning. I'm still drinking my coffee and still waking up. So bear with me, and we'll try to get you guys off making missions so you can publish them to the workshop. So first step, when you log in, you see the mission you can just play, or on the bottom right-hand corner, map editor, mission editor. So I've clicked on mission editor already, and you've got this, the edit window. So first thing, if you want to use any Steam Workshop maps, this is where you would start. You would start with Steam Workshop. You click on this, you click on maps. It's going to load all the maps. These are all the maps that I've subscribed to on the workshop. And these are maps that are available that that was kind of nice, that I have not necessarily subscribed to yet. So, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to build a quick mission using a small map so it loads quickly. Callias Island here, which I've used for other maps or other missions before. And be sure, if you use maps, be sure to vote. Give them a nice little upvote so that folks see that it's a good map. All right, so we already know we've got this map, we've got it loaded. So now I'm going to go and I'm going to create a standalone mission. If you want a group of missions that all happen in sequence, you would use the campaign editor. But we're just going to do a quick standalone mission. I'm going to select a new mission here, and I'm going to give it a file name. We'll call it mission editor tutorial, and I want to select a map that this mission is going to be on. So you can't really change this easily later, so now is the time to do it. So these are all the various maps that I've got loaded locally, and then here are my Steam Workshop maps. So I'm going to select Callias for Callias Island in the Steam Workshop section, and now I'm using the map that I downloaded from Steam Workshop, and then I'm just going to hit save. So now this map is coming up, and I am using my mouse. If I right click, I am able to rotate around and view the map. If I scroll out, I'm able to scroll out and zoom out and view the map. And then if I use W, A, S, and D, I can move my location in the map and then zoom into, here's a little airfield here. And then if I use X and Z, I'm able to raise and lower my position in the world for where I'm going to place objects. Okay, so those are the basic controls, and they're right up here under Help and Controls, so you can see how you're supposed to do that. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our mission parameters. So I'm just going to move over here, up in the Edit area up here, we're going to go Edit Scenario Info, and this is where we name our mission. So this is Mission Editor Tutorial, and this is what your users will see. This is a quick mission for tutorials. And then every mission, often we see missions that have an image associated with them. This will show up in the workshop. It'll show up in the, in game with the mission. So I will pull, I don't know what work. If I got it, okay, here we go. I've got a bunch of screenshots here. So we'll just add in a screenshot for the FA-26. So we've got a screenshot with our mission, we've got a title and a description, and now we're going to specify what vehicle. So we can do the AV-42C, FA-26, or the F-45A. I'm going to do the FA-26 for today. And then this is also where if we wanted to specify it as a training mission, we could. There's almost no reason to do that currently. equipment. Do we want the player to be able to configure their equipment, or do we want to specify, A, what are they even allowed to configure as a mission editor? Most of the time, for most people, you just leave all these checked, but you may want to actually make a mission that's very challenging and limits the most advanced weaponry. Or you can force the equip, so you can specify what's going to go on each hard point for the aircraft. So I'm not going to bother doing that. Briefing here. So this is where, when you select a mission, you are able to give briefing text to the player. So you can have as many notes as you want. In this case, take off, kill the bad guys, and land again. Pretty basic briefing text. And then you can add and attach like an audio briefing to this, where it's read, or another image, just like we did earlier. So just there we go. Now we've got an image, and it's looking a little bit more professional. If you want to use budget, you limit the player's ability to purchase equipment. You can adjust a budget here. I usually just leave this pretty high so that they can play whatever they want. If you want to select the time of day, morning's one of my favorite times for the colors in the game. But you can select morning, day, or night. And then another really cool thing is you can select optional. So when players are in the configuration screen, they'll be able to select the time of day for their mission. So that is pretty cool. And then we can also determine, do you really want this to be hard? Disallow quick save, so they can't quick save, or they can only quick save when they've landed on the carrier or on an airbase, and when they're rearming. And then you can limit the number of quick saves. I have not done this. My missions have a wide range of difficulty levels and a wide range of players that are playing them, so I don't want to limit them, but you may want to if you're going for a super hardcore mission. And then RTB waypoints and refuel waypoints, these are waypoints that you would set. So if the player in the nav hits their RTB button, where do they go? If they hit their refuel button in the nav, where do they go? So if you set up a tanker, you would just select this, and you would select the actual tanker here. If you've got a carrier or an airbase, you would select these, or a waypoint that you want to set for where they're going when they're going to return to base. So we're going to leave those blank for now. And now we've got our mission set up here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save, and it's a good idea to save regularly as you're going through. And so we've set up our mission brief. We've got a briefing set. So now I'm just going to create a very quick scenario here. So we're going to set up a scenario where we've got an FA-26. We're going to take off from the carrier with a wingman. We're going to go intercept some enemy aircraft that are flying cap over the airbase over here. When we kill them, we're going to trigger a reserve unit to take off from the airbase. We're going to kill them, and then we're going to land on the airbase, or we're going to land back on the carrier. So that's what we're going to do right now. So the first thing we need a carrier. So let's create a carrier. I'm going to rotate using Q and E so that my carrier is facing out to sea. When I create it, it's basically going to latch on to the location of our cursor here. So I'm going to create a new unit. It's going to be an allied unit. It's a C unit right here, and it's an aircraft carrier. Okay, so we've got our aircraft carrier right here. He's ready to go. If I really want to have a large fleet, I would make him part of a C group, and all of those units as part of the same group. For now, I'm just going to have him be parked. If we want, we could create a path and have him follow and steam along that path, or go to a waypoint. But for now, we're just going to have that. And so great, now we've got our carrier. So now I'm going to raise up my cursor, because I'm going to place my aircraft units. And for now, you just have to place them in the air, and then we're going to attach them to the carrier. So let's get our player unit. So we're creating a new unit. We select our player over here, and now we've got our player unit. And when we create the player unit, we've got a couple different options here. So for start mode, cold start mode means pretty much everything's turned off, and you have to start it up. Flight ready means the engines are running. You still have to configure your MFDs, but then you're essentially ready to go. And then flight AP is it's already flying, it's on autopilot, and you better give them an initial airspeed so that you don't fall out of the sky when you spawn. So we're going to just make this one flight ready. Normally I like cold, but for anybody testing this mission, it's a little bit faster to get going. And we're going to make our player part of a group, a wing. So we're going to make our player part of Alpha group. So since he's the first one, he'll be Alpha 1-1. And now we've got our player. So let's create his wingman. So we're going to do a new unit, go to aircraft, FA-26B, and we've now got a new unit. And look, I didn't move my my cursor, so now they're spawned right on each other. If we were going to do this in the air and not attached to the carrier, if I want to move him, I'm in the unit screen, it's selected, I see it, I'm going to click the move button, and now I'll use my cursor to move, and I'll set this aircraft in formation behind my aircraft, and you see moving unit. Click move again, and now it's latched in that location. Okay, so we've created our FA-26B. I'm going to join him to Alpha group, so he's part of the group with my player in it. And here I can select which wingman voice he wants. Do I want the default one? Do I want one of these other voices? So we'll give him Templar. And you can hear a sample. All right, so I guess that didn't come across. Let's see if you can hear. Okay, well maybe you're just going to hear it through the microphone. So I guess I haven't set up my recording quite properly to get that for you. Sorry about that, guys. So right now his default behavior is orbit. We're going to set that to parked because he's going to start off parked on the carrier, and then we're going to ignore the other defaults here. We'll go ahead and leave him as engage enemies for now, but if you want to have him be completely controlled by the player, set it to non-engage, and then the player has to tell him when to engage as wing lead. All right, so we've got our player and our FA-26 units spawned here. They're over the carrier. We're going to now go attach them to the carrier. So we click on our aircraft carrier in our unit list here, and we click Edit Carrier. And now you see all the different spots we can spawn someone on the carrier. So I'm going to go ahead and spawn the player in the spot 1 by Cat 1. So it's going to be a really quick, taxi to the cat. And then I'm going to give our wingman Alpha 2 spawn right here, right behind the player. So now you'll see, if you look down here on the carrier, we've got our player aircraft here and our wingman spawning right here. All right, so we've got a player, we've got a wingman, we've attached them to the carrier. Now let's create our enemy units. So we're going to come over here to this to the airbase here. And so first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to create a loiter point for my cat, because they're already going to be up and flying. I'm thinking I want them to be probably, I like to do things in feet, so but everything in the mission editor is in meters. So if I want them to be at 4,000 feet, I'll go to my trusty meters to feet calculator on Google. 4,000 feet is 1,219 meters. So if I want to get exact with my placement of my cursor, right down here, we've got altitude right here, MSL above mean sea level, or AGL above ground level. So I want to do above sea level, and I'm going to tell it to go to 1,219 meters, 1,219 meters. And now that's where my cursor is. So I'm at the altitude I want. We'll close this unit screen, and now we're going to create a waypoint for our enemy cap to circle. So we're going to create a new waypoint. We'll call it enemy loiter. All right, so now we've got a waypoint for our enemy to orbit around. And so now let's create our enemy units. So first we will go back to units, we'll create a new unit, and now we're going to select enemy units, aircraft, and we'll just go with a basic ASF-30. And if I zoom in, you can see our ASF-30 right here. Right now he does not have an aircraft group, so let's give him a group. So he's going to start out as Tango group, and so he'll be Tango 1. He'll have an initial airspeed all set. We're going to give him a default orbit point. So enemy loiter is the default orbit point. So he's going to stay and he's going to orbit right around this point. And then from there, we'll leave his radar on. If he had to RTB, where does he RTB? He'll RTB to the Callias Island Air Base. I don't think he's going to live long enough to RTB, but what can you do? And then let's set him not to engage enemies now. So this is where we're going to control when the enemy unit is going to engage with our player. So we've got him, and now let's create a wingman for him. So I'm going to move my cursor off to the side, and now right up here, I'm going to do copy. So I've copied the unit, now it's in move mode, and I'm going to click move, so I'm placing the second unit here. And he's got all the same settings as the first one. This is super handy for being able to set up units together. So now we've got our Tango group, group of 2. They're going to be loitering. They're spawning immediately, and they're just going to be flying around here, and they're not going to engage anybody until we tell them to. All right, so we've got that. Now, what I want to do is when this unit's destroyed, I want to trigger a reserve unit coming from the airbase. One of the things that I realized I didn't do, but on most maps, the airbase has a default, whatever airbases they have a default, whether they are friendly or enemy air bases. So on this tab down right here, we're going to click bases. We see the air base right here, and it's called Callias Island. We can rename it to Bad Guy Base. And that's what it will appear as when you're doing selection for whichever base that is. And we're going to say it's an enemy base. Okay, so now at least we know what the base is and who it's tied to. So let's set up our reserve unit. So there's going to be a unit of aircraft here. I double clicked to teleport, and they are going to take off when our unit is destroyed, when our first enemy aircrafts are destroyed. So again, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy an existing aircraft so that I've got a good start right here, and now I'm going to make edits to it. So in this case, this is a new aircraft group. We're going to call it Oscar Group, and his default behavior is actually parked. We don't want him to do anything until we tell him. He'll have a default orbit point, so after he takes off, unless he's got other orders, he's going to go to that orbit point. And he's also set to not engage enemies, but he will spawn immediately, so he'll be parked right over here on the field. And now we're going to set up his wingman, so we're going to copy him and hit the move button to lock in his position. Okay, so now we've got our Tango group and we've got our Oscar group ready for takeoff. So now what are we going to do? We're going to create our objectives. So usually I map all this stuff out before I even start mission creation, so I know about what I want to do. So in this case, we're going to do, I think we need 4 objectives here. So our first objective is going to be take off. So I created a new objective here. I'm going to rename it take off, right? I'm going to give it a little detail so that when the user checks their objective list, it says take off from the carrier. And now, what's the objective type? We have multiple objective types here. In this case, there is no objective type for takeoff, but I just want to be able to trigger it because I might want to trigger an audio brief in mid-flight after they take off or something else. So we don't have the objective type for takeoff, but what we do have is a super powerful objective called conditional. So if I hit the conditional objective, its start mode is immediate. So this is the first objective. It's going to be available immediately. And how do I do a conditional objective? These are pretty advanced objectives and very powerful. So I'm going to click on the conditional here for success criteria. And I'm going to create a condition for a unit. The unit is the player unit, and by default it shows the player property is landed. So what I'm going to say is I'm going to say this objective is going to be complete when the player reaches a certain altitude. Now in this case, instead of mean sea level, it's ASL above sea level, which is fine. So we're going to say if altitude is greater than, call it 50 meters or so. Oops, didn't mean to do that yet. I hit enter too soon. Now, when you create an objective like this, you have to actually link it to the output. And the reason for this is if you want to have multiple objectives, that all of these things have to happen, we would create it this way, where we'd have two different things that have to happen, and if both of those things happen, then it would output. But in this case, we're just going to have a single one. But that's one of the powerful things of the condition editor here. Okay, so now we've got a success condition. Really, there's no fail condition, because if the user doesn't take off, the mission really never gets going. This is the takeoff objective, and if we want to have an event that starts as soon as this event takeoff starts, we could do that, or when it's complete, we could do that. We're not going to do that just now. All right, so that's our first objective. They're going to take off, and it's going to trigger when the unit gets above 50 meters, or about 150 feet. Our next objective is going to be destroy Tango group. So I'll give it a name. Okay, and the objective type is a destroy type. And the start mode, we want this to be a prerequisite objective. So this means it's not going to trigger and start until takeoff has been completed, or the prerequisite objective. So now we're going to give it a title, destroy the Tango group. And if we want to give a waypoint tied to this objective when it's activated, we can give a waypoint to the actual enemy. We can give a waypoint to the loiter area, which is what I'm going to do here. So the waypoint will be available in the in the mission objective screen and on the nav screen by hitting the objective button. And here's where we get really tricky. You really want to handhold a user, a player, we can auto select it. So the second that this objective comes on, their waypoint will change automatically, and it's going to send them, have them steer towards that waypoint. Now we want to set this to destroy targets. Which targets do they need to destroy? So we want them to destroy our first two ASFs, 30s, that are part of Tango group. And then how many do they have to destroy? I'm going to change that to 2. Now, if you're managing budgets and it's a really long mission and you want to give the player additional money for every kill, you could give them some amount of money for every kill. So if they land and rearm, they've got more money. And if they complete this objective, you could give them money. I'm not really using that, but there you go. So now we've got our destroy Tango group objective set up. Let's set up our next objective, which is going to be destroy Oscar group. So after Tango group is destroyed, destroy Oscar group. After Tango group is destroyed, we want them to destroy the next group. So the prerequisites for this are take off and destroy Tango group. And if we want to set a waypoint for that, we can. And then we want to make sure that we are selecting both our Tango targets, or our Oscar group, targets. And now we've got that objective ready to go. Now, one of the things that we had said was when Tango group is destroyed, we wanted to trigger Oscar group to take off. So there are 2 ways we can do that. One is in the Tango group objective editor. We can say, okay, when this mission is completed, we want to do an action, and that action is to tell the unit group Oscar to take off. So I've done unit group Oscar take off. So when this this objective is completed, the enemy Oscar group is going to take off. Now remember, we left Oscar group's engage enemies check off. So that's something to just keep in mind, the state of your enemies. So in this case, we'll go ahead and trigger them unit group Oscar, and we're going to tell them to set engage enemies, and we're going to tell them to engage enemies. Okay, and if we want to get really specific after that, we can tell them to attack the player group. And so we can say attack target. Now they're going to engage enemies, they're already going to see you. So you can say attack target player, although that's going to set both of them to target the player, and then your wingman is off on his own. So I'm just going to leave that one. Engage enemies, you're going to be close enough, they're going to see you. But you can get a little bit more specific about it if you want. Okay. All right, so when destroyed Tango group is done, we're triggering the Oscar unit takeoff. And then from there, we have the Oscar group destruction objective. And now finally, when that objective is done, we want the player to land on the carrier. So we're going to create our final objective, which is land, or RTB, return to base. And we're going to give a little more info, land on the carrier. Okay, so this is not an immediate start mode. This is another prerequisite. All of these previous objectives must be complete before this triggers. We're going to set a waypoint to the aircraft carrier. Objective type, right? This is not a destroy objective. This is a land objective. So let's change our objective type to land. We're going to land on the carrier. And one of the things I've noticed, whenever you're setting a land objective on a carrier or an air base, you need to specify a radius for it to trigger when they land. So generally speaking, I'll just do, especially with a carrier, I want it to be nice and clean. So 500 meters in any direction they land on the carrier, which is otherwise would be in the middle of the sea, it's going to trigger a completion event. Okay. So if you're on an air base, generally speaking, I do 1,000 to 1,500 meters. So that would cover, if you have a waypoint right in the middle of the, if you have a waypoint right in the middle of the air base, like right here, that will cover the vast majority of the air base. And you can see, and if you're not sure, you can use a cool little tool called Measure right up here, which is the R tool. Click your center, and then you'll see that is 1,000 meters right there at the top. So 1,500 meters will pretty much cover the entire airbase. If you land anywhere in this radius, you'll get a mission or a completion for that land objective. Okay. All right. So we've got our objectives set up: takeoff, destroy Tango group, destroy Oscar group, and RTB. Now let's create a proximity trigger for our takeoff. So when our player takes off, what's going to happen? Let's walk this through. We take off. Once they're at a certain altitude, the takeoff objective is complete, and now they've got the destroy Tango group objective and the waypoint to enemy loiter. Right. So they're going to be heading this way towards the enemy loiter point. Now our enemies are still set to not engage. So how do we tell our enemies that it's time to go ahead and engage with the player? Well, we'll use a proximity trigger. So down this set of tabs, we're going to go to events, and we're going to create, there are two types of events, a timed event or a trigger event. A trigger event is what we're going to use here, and we're going to create a new trigger. And this new trigger is a proximity trigger. We're going to call it, this is for Tango group to engage. And this is a trigger centered around the enemy loiter waypoint, so enemy loiter. And if I kind of come up here, I can see the radius of the waypoint. I see where my carrier is here. And so this waypoint is going to be triggered by the player, but it could be triggered by any unit coming into the area. We could even change this to a proximity or a conditional trigger, and have it be when the player is detected or something like that. But in this case, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to keep it as a loiter, a waypoint unit, and then on enter, when the player enters this, something's going to happen. So we are at 500 meters right now, radius. You see the little blue circle there. We're going to make it, let's look at 5,000 meters. Is that big enough? No, let's make it even bigger. Let's make it so they start to engage when the player's like right about here. So let's inch this up to 10,000 meters. There we go. That should work. And now once the player hits this point, these enemy targets are going to engage. That is, of course, unless the player's already killed them with the long-range missiles. But that's okay. This is just a scenario that we're playing with. So when this happens, when this is triggered, we're going to set an action. And the action is for our unit group, the entire group. We could set an individual unit if we want, but Tango, and Tango is going to set engage enemies. Okay, so we're going to see, we see the engage box, and you have to check this. Okay, so now when our player enters this zone, Tango group is going to move to, or is, if they detect them, is going to engage them. All right, so that's awesome. So now we've got our takeoff triggers for our player. Our player is going to take off. They're going to fly into this section, and we noted also, this is one thing that people often forget, is this trigger has to be enabled. So when we created the trigger, by default, it's enabled. So from the start of the mission, if these conditions are met, it'll be enabled. But you can have it turned off and enable it later in a mission if you get into more complex missions. Okay, so our player is going to take off. What about our wingman? We did not tell our wingman to do anything. If you remember, our wingman right here, let's zoom in on this guy. He's starting off parked and cold, and we haven't told him to do anything yet. So what I'm going to do with that, I want him to take off, but I don't want him to take off right away. You know, I want to give the player a chance to get his bearings and then have the wingman take off around when the player takes off. So there are a couple different cool things we can do here to trigger when the wingman takes off. This one's a little more advanced, but I kind of want you guys to have an idea of what's possible here. So let's create a new event, time or trigger. We're going to call it wingman takeoff. And we're going to set this as a conditional. So there are a couple things you could do here when we go into our conditional settings. So we can say this is always going to be based off the player. You know, I want the wingman to take off when the player does something. And so we have a couple different options. We could say if we're starting off cold, we want the wingman to start doing something once the player's engines are on. Or we could have a radio call once the player's engines are on. In this case, I want to set the wingman to take off when the player hits a certain airspeed, and that's going to be actually based on their taxiing. So I'm going to say if they are above like 8 meters per second, that's when I want this wingman to take off. So I'm going to, when the player's speed starts to taxi, he's going to have a positive airspeed, and then that's going to trigger our wingman to take off. So we've got that, and now we've got our conditional set, and we're going to set the action for our specific unit, our wingman. But if you have a whole group of wingmen, you can just do it as unit group, and we're going to do takeoff. All right, so now we've got a trigger for our wingman to take off. I'm just going to hit save real quick because, you know, it's always good to save. And we've got our proximity trigger for cap to engage. Now I'm going to polish it a little bit. We're going to add in some audio. So initially, usually you want some kind of brief, right, when the mission starts. There are a lot of ways to do this, via radio call. I use Audacity to record my radio calls, and then the game automatically overlays the radio sounds to it. So one way you can do this is at your very first objective. You could say at one start, I want this radio call to happen. And so we would go to system, radio message, and then we would select our radio message. I don't like using that because essentially the second the mission starts, this radio message is playing. And that's not really great, especially if things are, the player's still getting their bounds, things are still loading, and it might be, if you have a lot of assets, it might be a little jittery until it settles in on load. So I personally like to do I'm just going to get rid of that. I like to actually start every mission with a set of timed events. So I'm going to show how I do this. I do events. It's under timed tab, new group. And almost every mission I create an initialized mission. And there might be initial sets of commands I want to give multiple units on a complex mission. In this case, it's pretty simple. I want this to begin immediately. And then from there, I'm going to create a new event that is going to happen 5 seconds after mission starts. So the mission's going to load up. I've got 5 seconds for the player to get their bearings and look around, and then I'm going to give them their initial brief trigger. So let's do that, and we're going to select action. This is a system action. System is the target. Radio message, okay? So I've saved my radio messages. If you're creating any assets, screenshots, radio messages, you need to save them in the game folder under Editor Resources. And then I have tons of these from various missions that I've created. I'm going to go into my folder that I created for Mission Editor Tutorial, and I've got my very first mission audio here. So let's hear it. Okay, so in five seconds after mission start, because this is set to begin immediately, I'm giving them this radio message. All right, so now I want a radio message on each one of our audio triggers. So now this one I'm going to tie to the end of an event. So Destroy Tango Group. At the end of Destroy Tango Group, we have Oscar taking off already. We have Oscar setting engage messages. Now I'm going to give them a radio call about the next objective. So we're going to set our radio message, and I think I said, I missed my set for Intercept Tango. So this one is when Tango Group's destroyed, I want them to destroy Oscar Group, so I set a radio message for that. Okay, so we've got that one, and I forgot to do my takeoff message after takeoff that sends them to destroy Tango Group. So we're going to do that. So we do takeoff. On completion, we want it to play our system message, radio message, and select Intercept Tango. So this would be all right. So they get a radio message at initial briefing. They get a radio message after they've taken off to go destroy Tango Group. After destroying Tango, they get a radio message to destroy Oscar Group. And then at the end of destroying Oscar Group, I want them to RTB, so I can set a radio message here, or I can set a radio message at RTB. Sometimes I get confused when I'm mission creating and I do it both ways, but I try to, with RTB in particular, I try to tie it to the RTB objective because there's no other time that this kind of system radio message should play. So we'll do RTB. And just one note about audio files. I tend to use Audacity to record them. Usually I'll clean them up a little bit. This case I didn't do much. I just did it very quick and dirty. I almost always save as OGG files, export them as OGG files because they're pretty small file size. So Steam Workshop does have limits on file size uploads, usually due to either PNG images are too big or you're using WAV files or something. So. Okay, so we've pretty much got this guy all set up. We've got our 4 objectives. We've got some trigger events. We've got a timed event. And everything should be good to go here. So what I'm going to do is make sure I save again. And then from there, I would launch the scenario to test it. Once the scenario is tested, I would go up to Steam. If I wanted to upload it to the workshop, I go Steam, Upload. And it's going to ask me, do you want to upload the single mission to the workshop? I say yes. And then anytime I make edits to it, I would come in here, edit, save, and then re-upload to the workshop and essentially enter a changelog. Okay, so that is a very quick and dirty mission creation. Those of you that are mission makers, you may have seen that I might have missed something here or there in here, and those are things that you have to test. Let me just say this: you have to test multiple times, before launching a mission or sharing it on the workshop, because you don't want your users. You'll get a bad reputation if you're launching missions that haven't been tested. And just get a friend to test it or something like that. But otherwise, players are going to get to know that your missions aren't very high quality and they're not going to want to waste their time. They only have so much time to play. So absolutely test your missions before you launch them or share them on Steam. And because I guarantee you, I probably, if I watch back on this, I probably miss 1 or 2 little things, although this one's a pretty simple one. The more complex the mission, the more things that you can miss when you're setting up, units or waypoints or paths. So maybe I'll do, if this is a good tutorial and people like it, Maybe at some point I'll do something a little bit more advanced with setting paths for folks, or reviewing mission creation for some of the missions that I've already done, so you can see how they were built. So let me know if you found this useful. I know most of my videos are more about flying other people's missions or my own missions and testing, but since Steam Workshop's out, there's a lot of interest in mission creation. So drop me a like, drop me a subscribe. This is Firecat, signing off.